r/AskReddit. Redditors who have eaten at one of the places in Gordon Ramsay's kitchen nightmares before or after he visited. How was it? Commenting because I hope this blows up. I'd love to read 100 replies to this. Not Gordon Ramsay, but I have a unique restaurant. Impossible and diners. Drive-ins and dives situation. Mama E's Soul Food was featured on Triple D first. The food was amazing and it was so busy that they opened a second location. I was turned off with the interior though. All of a sudden, you never heard anyone talk about it anymore. The second location closed and it slowly became an afterthought. Then it was featured on Restaurant Impossible. Robert Irvine had no complaints on the food, but the episode made me dislike the owner, so I've never returned. The upgrades to the interior were a big improvement. The restaurant is still in business but haven't been there in close to 10 years. My wife and I live in Vegas and ate at Gordon Ramsay's Hell's Kitchen. At Caesar's, my God, what an awful meal. His signature dish, the beef Wellington, was so bland. We both sent our meals back. Something which we almost never do. We both thought, what would Gordon Ramsay think of this place? He'd be screaming at the top of his lungs. Quote, I went to Amy's Baking Company in Scottsdale. It was the restaurant in the episode with the crazy Karen. I think it was the only restaurant the show featured where Gordon just walked off because they were too difficult to deal with. I went to check it out after the show had aired because why not? Food was unmemorable. The place was dead. My friend and I were the only patrons in there. The husband, owner, was our server. He was perfectly pleasant. Didn't ever go back. And it's closed now. I ate at Spin a Yarn Steakhouse up in Fremont for an uncle's birthday dinner after Gordon's visit. The staff were nice, but the decor and the whole place felt dated. Their food was not bad. Ordered the New York strip if I remember. It was a little tough and I ordered medium rare. I do remember that some people didn't enjoy their dishes, so it was very hit or miss with them. It's not at the level of, say, Gordon's own steak restaurant in Las Vegas. Ruth's Chris. Or Fleming's. Out of curiosity I looked them up. They're still around and are doing okay, looks like, so they're doing something right. All in all, not bad. But nothing really to write home about. I ate at Mama Rita's when it was new. One of the cooks that you can see on the show is a friend of mine. We worked together for a decade and the main cook is his wife. The food wasn't terrible, but it definitely wasn't good. Plus the shopping center it was in is buried deep in Newbury Park and kind of a chore to get there. I left thinking I never need to come here again. There are too many good Mexican places close to my house. There's a local Greek restaurant. We went once and it was pretty awful. We said we'd never go back again, but it's one of those places that some people love. It's been their favorite place for 40 years. And people have parties there. So we'd go and nibble on the greasy Americanized Greek food that tasted like it was made from recipes out of Some Better Homes and Garden magazine from 1966. Gordon Ramsay did an episode where he updated everything, simplified the menu, made it less fatty, salty, brightened up the interior because maybe now you'd want to see what was on your plate. We went and the server kept apologizing for the new menu. But the food was pretty good. The best we'd ever had there. Within a couple months. To great fanfare. They reverted back to how it used to be with a big ol' mea culpa. Yum. Moussaka that tastes like you bought it frozen from some second-rate Cisco. I have never been to a Kitchen Nightmare location but did visit a bar rescue location in New Orleans. They said they pretty much went back to how they were before the rescue. Service was good. Food was good, we didn't have any complaints. Pantaleone's is a restaurant in Denver that Ramsay had on his show. The owner, Pete, is Sicilian and a huge character. He goes on and on about how Ramsay is a moron, and even though he gave him a brand new stove, he got a surprise $5,000 tax bill the next year. He says his proudest moment is when the chef asked him for his pizza dough recipe and he got to tell him, "Fuck no. The food at the restaurant is amazing. Authentic Sicilian cuisine that is absolutely delicious." Before the food was good, not the best, but certainly delicious after it was 5 stars. The menu didn't change, but the manner in which they made it so much better. Ate with reps and sold wine to Lido in Manhattan Beach a couple times. Unfortunately, food was perfectly fine. Service was prompt. And the owner was professional to deal with. Was really hoping for some plate smashing and drama and C words. Work weeks are boring. I ate at Mama Cherry's Soul Shack in Brighton in the UK. Quite a few times actually. The food was always great. It was well cooked, full of flavor and generous portions for what you paid. I have a friend who worked with Ramsay and Marco Pierre White. He said Pierre White was demanding but fair and very generous to his staff. Whereas Ramsay could actually be quite nice one minute but an utter fucking bell end the next. Catfish Cabin. The episode showed just how lazy, stupid and bribable Memphis TN health inspectors are. Then Ramsay showed everyone how disgusting it was inside. The A in the window genuinely should have been an FR. If rating went that low. An R showed as its thing. Bibbidi boppity blue. Less than a year after the show. It's back to rats, rotten fish, and roaches. Freaking moron owners made no effort to save it. Finally a post for me. There's a pizza place right by my apartment that was on Kitchen Nightmares. I've only eaten there after the appearance. But it's some of the best pizza I've ever had. The owner says Ramsay was an asshole and tried to get his pizza crust recipe. English is not his first language. And after watching the episode, I did kinda feel like Ramsay was walking all over him and he wasn't really able to stick up for himself. Then again, I do get a sense of stubbornness from the pizzeria owner as well. I went to the one in Baltimore with a big flamingo sign. The service was really slow and it wasn't even crowded. It was kinda icky but in a pretty normal, this is a restaurant in Baltimore, way. A local place was on Restaurant Impossible. I went there once a few years before Robert Irvine came and thought the food was fine. I do remember the decor being pretty boring. After Robert was there the decor vastly improved. The place looked great. The food was still meh. I think we got cheesesteak egg rolls and I remember them being pretty greasy. The restaurant closed a few years later. Once the hype of the show died down, it just wasn't good enough to make people want to return. An interesting thing while watching the episode was one of the owners was a regular customer at the grocery store I used to work at. She always came in with 2 energetic young boys and she told me once they were her grandchildren. She had custody of. Learned from the show that her son was in jail, so that explained why she had custody. My mom and I used to go to a place called El Greco in Austin, Texas. They served mid-Greek food. We heard about the Kitchen Nightmares episode. Saw that Chef Mike, a microwave, made all the food. And we stopped going. They're closed now, so I doubt Ramsay made an impact edit. Ramsay, not Ramsay SMH. Chappie's in Nashville. During and after, and also was involved in changes, construction done as part of the show. Nasty. Lol. I've been to the Towns Inn in Harper's Ferry that was featured on Hotel Hell. I don't remember the food at all, but it was a trip to slowly realize I'd been there multiple times as a kid. I used to treat myself occasionally to Zocalo, a Mexican restaurant in Philadelphia. The food was vastly better before Gordon changed the menu. Their entire problem was location. On the fringe of 2 universities. But not the kind of place students would go. Staff and faculty loved it, but it was too far away for the usual lunch period. So people would go to the vastly inferior Mexican place in the center of campus. Even though the service and food were terrible and would take as long or longer to finish as it would have to walk to Zocalo. If you watch the episode, you could tell Gordon had a difficult time coming up with problems. The kitchen was old but clean. The food was great. The owner, chef, was more than willing to accept any suggestions Gordon had. The restaurant was inviting, and the staff was friendly. They were really doing it all right. I really didn't like the way the owner's wife was portrayed in the episode. She was a lovely, friendly woman who liked to make sure her customers felt welcome and were happy. I really miss that place, and I hope the owners and staff are doing well today. In the UK series, Gordon Ramsay is much more calm and reasonable, and really considers the situation carefully. In the US series, he is playing the character of a British villain, and so he's much more rude and angry all the time. He even gives himself a more upper-class accent. It's silly. I forgot that Oklahoma City also had a weird man versus food experience. Adam Richman visited back in 2010, but everyone was confused because there were no well-known eating challenges at the time. He visited the Steak and Catfish Barn, a restaurant that was not well known and a restaurant that basically created an eating challenge. For the show, the owners made so much money that they retired in August of 2014. Here's the twist. They sold their name and secret recipes to a customer. He opened back up in a terrible location to mixed reviews. Then in 2017, he made the local news about a sign he displayed warning transgender customers to not be caught in the wrong restrooms. He went out of business the next year. Not kitchen nightmares but bar rescue. It was our favorite bar when we lived in Ann Arbor. I can't remember the name, but it was a sports bar. The owner actually was an asshole, so that was accurate. But the changes were minimal. The bar closed soon after because the owner was arrested for tax evasion. How much of the show is made up, I wonder? I went to the restaurant Lowry's in coastal Virginia a couple years ago that was featured on Kitchen Nightmares. It was actually super good. The seafood was super fresh and local, and the service was great. It definitely seemed like they had turned things around. The weird thing was that the restaurant was super big and they had only remodeled the front bit of it during the show. So there was a weird couple rooms in the back that were a much older style and had a group of super old people hanging out listening to some live music. It was also pretty funny that a lot of older local residents had left really negative reviews about how the restaurant had gone downhill, even when the food they used to be serving was super old and spoiled. Unfortunately, I heard they went under during COVID since they had spent a lot of their savings turning the place around. I live down the street from Sandra D's in Sacramento. CA was on 24 Hours to Hell and Back. I went not too long after the show aired and they had already gone back to the old menu. Shitty ingredients and everything. Was very disappointed because a little over a decade ago the place was actually good. The restaurant closed down shortly after. 3 or so years later someone finally moved into the building, but they're still fixing the place up. Hasn't opened yet. It's gonna be another barbecue spot though. In St. John's, NFLD, there is a restaurant called Yellow Belly on, I think, Water Street that was featured on You Gotta Eat Here. It had the best damn seafood chowder you've ever eaten. Before and after being on the show. So good. Considering something like 95% of them closed. Eaten at the Glass House in Ambleside, which I believe was in the very first ever episode of Kitchen Nightmares, the UK version, when it was a show about cooking and running a restaurant. It's now called The Fulling Mill, or was when I ate there, and it was nice, no complaints. I live in NC and this wasn't a Ramsay show, but it was on Bar Rescue. It was called Characters but was turned into Moonrunners. That location turned hands several times before it became Characters. Good location but nothing ever stuck. Characters wasn't bad. The food was actually good, although the menu was all over the place, but the host was right because that bar didn't know what it wanted to be. After the show they stuck with the rescue pan. For was still good and made sense and is still doing good. I have a Triple D story. Used to frequent HRD Cafe in San Francisco before it was on the show, as it was near our office. The menu was just this wild mashup of Asian fusion and weird semi-comfort food type dishes. I used to get the pork chops with rice. Coworkers would get Mongolian beef cheesesteaks, kimchi burritos, stuff like that. Triple D episode came out. And as always, they got slammed with business. The owners ended up cutting the menu back by like 80%. Focused very heavily on a few fusion items. And that was it. A few years later, they went in a healthy direction. All brown rice, quinoa bowls. Little, no fusion dishes. And one of the co-owners or head chefs left and took all the Korean fusion stuff with her and opened a food truck that was hugely successful. I think there were some ownership changes after that. And eventually HRD went back to a proper fusion menu. And has settled in pretty well since then. I ate at J. Willie's in South Bend. After Gordon visited. The menu was pretty good and the staff service was friendly, but the actual food was largely crappy. The issues weren't because of Gordon. It was the preparation. It seemed like everything had been under a warmer and microwaved as opposed to freshly made. The potato skins were dried out and barbecue sauce was meh. With a little more effort in the kitchen, the place could have made it. It had solid decor and had a few cool historical items from Notre Dame football on the walls. But I think the biggest obstacle was the fact they couldn't keep up with Famous Dave's, which was not too far away and makes better food. In retrospect, it was a bit of a red flag that it was empty on a Notre Dame football weekend and we were seated almost immediately. It wasn't too long after my visit that it shut down. I didn't know it was on Kitchen Nightmares until I looked at the wall on the way out and saw his photo with the staff. Friend of my wife owned one in New England. Food was good. It was a local place that served local food. Any fish and chips. Friend clams chowder etc. The locals loved it. Him and his crew came in and tried to turn it into a chic seafood place. Doors were closed for good a few weeks later. You have to know your audience. And the producers and staff of that show didn't. Nor did they care. They're making TV, not restaurants. Overall just meh. Before he came to my town there was a restaurant, Levante's. Every Christmas season my family and I would go there. And I thought the food tasted fine. I was 11, so that could be a reason why. It was Italian food. And for some reason was changed to a burger place when he finished up with the place. It was cool for a while because my town was so small and out of the way. But eventually they sold the place. In my opinion, this was because of the location of the place. It being on the end of town rather than in the middle. And Italian food was being dominated by another restaurant down the street. I guess the owners didn't like making burgers either. It was cool to have a television crew on my main street though. I've eaten at a place featured on Triple D in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Food was good but not remarkable. Ooh, good question. Following to read responses. Mine's a Robert Irvine restaurant, Impossible Restaurant. It was called Cave Inn. Just a few miles outside of Disney World in Winter Garden, Florida. The restaurant was themed to caveman times and served barbecue, big ribs, stegosaurus shreds, pulled pork, that kind of stuff. It was oddly themed to the inside of a cave and had some weird artifacts like props used in the Flintstones movie. Robert Irvine came in and redid the menu, as they didn't seem to have a good handle on how much it cost to make their items and how to price them. They redid the inside of the restaurant to eliminate some of the theming. Because in Orlando, if you're going to open a theme restaurant, you either go all the way or don't bother. They reopened. And within a few months we went back and noted that some of the items that Robert had removed from The menu were back. They tried having trivia nights and karaoke. The place just couldn't decide what it was. And shortly thereafter it closed. A sports bar called the Arena in Ann Arbor, Michigan was on bar rescue. I went all the time before that and it was a perfectly fine place for beer, shots, and standard bar food. Decent wings, burgers, fried appetizers. Their one and only problem was that they were consistently understaffed. There was always like 2 fewer waiters and 1 fewer bartender than you would expect to be able to cover the large space. I never watched the episode, but all they needed to do was just have more people per shift. A place I grew up eating at, due to lack of other options in Nowheresville, Michigan, was on Restaurant Impossible. The food was always pretty average to mediocre, but it was one of the few options at the time. I think a lot of stuff was microwaved. The interior had a specific decor theme which didn't age well. It was always dark and dusty. After the show came through, there was an immediate difference in the food and decor. Everything was a little bit better. However, I think they quickly reverted back to their old microwave ways and the restaurant eventually closed. He did Leone's near me. It was a pizza by the slice place, but they also have sit-down restaurant. It went from really bad to like okay. Ate at ABC Diner before it was on the show. It was fine. Amy was very nice and chatted with us for a while. She told us she made all the desserts, which we found out from the show was untrue. I ate at Cafe Hun a handful of times before it ended up on the show. The place was kind of a tourist trap, but the food was decent. They would have pretty good specials in the middle of the week, which was when I would go. They mostly started having problems with PR because the owner did a bunch of things that pissed off the locals. I think on the episode Ramsay actually liked the food and it was more about him trying to help the owner with the PR situation. I think I ate there once after the show aired. It was fine. The place seemed to have bounced back. It closed this year. I'm not sure if COVID did them in or if they were having other problems. I also went to Murphy's a couple of times. Dive bar in Fells Point that was on bar rescue. I got really sick the day after drinking there one night. In their defense, I drank a lot that night. But seeing how their kitchen was run did make me think maybe they gave me food poisoning. I did not go back after it reopened. I think it might have even closed for good before the episode even aired. I went to a pizza place in Park Slope, Brooklyn that was on that show. I think the owner was the son of the guy who opened it years ago. But it had went south once he took over. I remember the place was still using Gordon Ramsay's changes. But the place looked like it was still struggling. I asked the owner what the experience was like making the show. And he said they were shady with the way some things went down. Like there was a scene that he thought was not being filmed, where he was opening up about his dad. It was interesting. Bellissimo 100% would do it again. I used to frequent a spot featured on Restaurant Impossible. The episode didn't address the real issue. The family's struggle with drugs and stolen money. It was torn down a couple years later and is now a pregnancy center. My only brush with greatness is a bakery in our county that won Cupcake Wars like 10 years ago. They're still in business and still making fantastic cupcakes. Not Gordon Ramsay's, but the national version of Kitchen Nightmares. I went to an Indian and a Mexican restaurant that were on the show. The food was not bad, but service was terrible. That said, it was a few years before the show. I ate at a Greek place called Giannis in Seattle a few years after Kitchen Nightmares was there. The food was good. Nothing super special, but not bad. I'd eat there again. But it's pretty far away from me now. In maybe the most infamous episode, Sebastian's was remade into a fresh pizza restaurant. It began the show as an absolute mess. A ridiculously confusing menu. A microwave-oriented prepackaged fare. It looked bad. I never tried it before seeing the show. Oh, in BTW, the owner was completely delusional and one of the more entertaining crazies featured on Kitchen Nightmares. When I tried it shortly after the show aired, the pizza was really good. Crispy crust. Fantastic cheese. Really good. I didn't see Sebastian there. I heard he sold it a month later. I ate at a restaurant that Guy Fieri visited in Idaho. That place was literally concession stand quality food. Absolutely trash. Hotel hell. The Brick Hotel in Newtown Path Hotel was disgusting and food was bad on the show since then. I believe the hotel part is no longer active, and the restaurant has been turned into Rocco's at the Brick, one of, if not the best, steakhouses in the area. After Ramsay's visit, Oceana in the New Orleans French Quarter. Very mediocre considering the overall quality of New Orleans food. I worked at Jack's Waterfront in St. Clair Shores, Michigan. The place was a dump when he got there. Became a dump after he left and has been a turn and burn for the owner for decades. Can't remember the bum's name, but he's a known ass and a terrible business owner. It's a shame, because it's the perfect on the water location in the area, known as the Nautical Mile. Never did, but did eat at a Gordon Ramsay restaurant in LA. Food and service were awful. Should have known when it was too easy to get a res. My mom ate at Old Neighborhood in Colorado. Ramsay redid the place. They changed ownership and changed the name, and now the building is for sale. My mom said the food was horrible and never could figure out how it stayed open for so long. Going to say they never kept Ramsay's advice. Obviously even the change never helped. There's one in my town. It used to be an Italian restaurant, but it's Jimmy John's now. I only found out about it after having eaten there. It was a solid 4/5 restaurant. He came to a restaurant in my neighborhood in Philadelphia. Be Hot Potato Cafe. It was unremarkable before and unmemorable after, and closed not too long after his visit. I want to say that it appeared in one of the earlier seasons but can't say for sure. As they were introducing the neighborhood, you can actually see my house in one of the shots. Manja and it sucked. The owner ignored Gordon and went back to her old habits. I did an open mic night at a place called Scottsdale Stand Up the night they were there for a 2.0 episode showing how far the restaurant had come since the original segment. It was an absolute shit show. We couldn't get on stage until 1 a.m. But thankfully all the cameras had left. Didn't eat there, but the place shut down like 2 months later. It was fine. It wasn't really the food quality that was the issue at this place. It was the wife's insane spending. Butterfly decals on expensive bathroom tiles. Huge portions of roast. I ate at the pizza place that was attached to Mamma Mia's in Brooklyn. It was okay at best. I went to a place in Nottingham, UK, where during Kitchen Nightmares he'd implemented a pie night. Genuinely don't remember the name of the restaurant now. Didn't go on pie night. But the venison tartare I had as a starter is still one of the best things I've ever tasted. And I compare every starter since to it. It's been 9 years. I didn't eat at the Fenwick Arms, as it had closed. But while in Yorkshire I made a special trip out to the little town of Aldborough to go to the Ship Inn, which was run by the same couple. Had the Sunday roast with real British gravy. And it was, bar none, the best meal I had the entire trip. Got a chance to speak to Brian and Elaine. And they were surprised and pleased to hear why this random American was eating there. Overall a really fun experience. Not that great. I lived in Woodland Park where Manja was. I've lived in this town since I was a little kid. Before it was the Italian restaurant. It was a nice Japanese place called Diamond Cafe. That's why there was a drive-through. The food was very overpriced and bland before Ramsay came and not much improved after. I went to high school with the workers. The owner's daughter was as unbearable in school as she was in the episode. Also, Something not shown is that Trevor, the boy on drugs in the episode, was told by Gordon that if he got clean, Gordon would pay for his culinary education. Not sure if he ended up doing that, but Trevor is now a chef in Fort Carson, I believe, and is doing well. Manja Manja is now a Jimmy John's. They did a restaurant in my hometown. Terrible before. Okay, after. The shittiest part was they blocked off the entire road and half the park next to the restaurant. It was right next to the bus stop, and every time my friend would get home from work, they would make her walk all the way around the park, essentially quadrupling her walk. My parents ate at an overpriced restaurant in SoCal that Gordon Ramsay had on Kitchen Nightmares, and said the food was absolute garbage. The restaurant changed ownership after and got slightly better, and is now abandoned. Weirdest part was that it was located in a trendy strip mall in an expensive SoCal neighborhood. Subscribe for more content.